When Lydia Hart lost her job at Harborfield Assurance, the silence in her kitchen felt like a broken metronome. It clicked and stopped and clicked again, each tick a reminder that the days had edges now. She called her son anyway. "I won't be able to do gifts this Christmas," she said gently. "Just dinner at my place. That I can do." Caleb sounded tired, but kind. "It's fine, Mom. We'll all come." Ray's excited. Ray, his wife, was excited about many things that didn't include Lydia. But Lydia set the table the old way. Cloth napkins, her mother's plates like small moons on the oak table, a rosemary roast that perfumed the hallway. She had laid every holiday of Caleb's childhood across this wood. Maybe memory would be enough of a gift. When they arrived, Ray swept in first, ribboned in a scarf that glowed cranberry under the light. She kissed the air near Lydia's cheek and strode to the table as if she were crossing a stage. Caleb came behind, tentative, carrying a bottle of supermarket wine and something like apology in his hands. Dinner began decently. Lydia kept the conversation warm and harmless. Movies, traffic, the neighbor who'd knitted hats for the stray cats again. Caleb asked about her severance. Ray asked about job listings with the chilly curiosity of someone paging through a magazine at the dentist. When Lydia stood to serve the roast, the moment, small, ordinary, split. Ray reached across, light and quick, and took Lydia's plate from her hands. "No presents for us," she said with a smile that wasn't one. "No food for you." The sentence didn't drift into the air so much as fall. Caleb's mouth opened. Lydia blinked at the plate in Ray's grip, the grease-gloss surface wobbling slightly as if it too were uncertain. The room narrowed to the length of the table. Candles, silver, a radiant cruelty perfectly centered. Caleb whispered, "Ray." "It's a joke," Ray said brightly and laughed. No one followed. She set the plate down with a theatrical huff, then added, half under her breath, "We all have to tighten belts." Lydia's hands were steady when she retrieved the plate. The steadiness surprised her. She had thought humiliation would tremble, but it didn't. It settled. It arranged the cutlery. It went and turned off the whistling kettle in the kitchen, and returned with a composed face that had raised Caleb and paid mortgages and memorized account numbers while the world slept. She ate little. She listened to the forks. She watched Ray pour herself more wine without asking. When Caleb reached for Lydia's glass to refill it, Ray's fingers circled his wrist. "Budget," she murmured and released him. After dessert, after the ritual tiding that felt less like gratitude and more like erasure, Lydia excused herself. "I'm a bit tired," she said. She could feel both of them watching her, Caleb with confusion, Ray with something like victory, while she walked down the hall to her bedroom, closed the door, and leaned against it. The house listened to her breathe. She looked at the cedar chest at the foot of the bed, the one that still smelled faintly of winter coats and lemon oil. Inside were papers, all the dull magic of adulthood. Deeds, statements, letters, the articles of organization for a shell company with an unremarkable name, Maple Haven LLC. A thing built for storms, designed to be invisible. 3 years earlier, on advice she had paid for in 4 installments, Lydia bought this very house through Maple Haven. If anything ever went wrong, divorce, debt, a lawsuit, she'd been told the house would be safer, the lines more complicated to cross. It had felt paranoid then. It felt prophetic now. She set the paperwork on the quilt and balanced her phone on top. The screen reflected her face in miniatures, one Lydia above, one below, both thinking the same careful thought. They believe I am a guest in my own home. Her phone vibrated. A message from Caleb. She didn't mean it like that. "She's just stressed. We're all stressed." Lydia typed, erased, typed again. "Of course. Get some rest. See you tomorrow." She didn't add, "You live here because of me. You wake under my roof and call it yours." She didn't add, "I will not be made small in the house I bled quietly to buy." Instead, she called Paula Monroe. Paula, a property manager with a spine of carbon fiber and the smile of a kindergarten teacher, answered on the second ring. "Lydia, I was just thinking of you. How's the quiet life?" Loud, Lydia said, "I need a market rate assessment on Maple Drive, and I need it emailed to me tomorrow morning. Can you do that?" Before coffee, Paula said. She didn't ask why. She never did. You want the rental estimate or the sale? Both, Lydia said. And Paula, bring your clipboard. I'd like a formal walkthrough. Let's do it properly. She hung up and went to the window. Outside, the winter street was a neat ribbon of frost and porch lights. She watched Caleb and Ray cross the yard, their two shadows merging and separating on the lawn. Ray laughed at something, quick and high. Caleb stuffed his hands into his pockets, the way he did when he felt small. It pinched Lydia's heart. She pressed her palm to the cold glass until it cooled the feeling. In the kitchen, she rinsed plates and listened to the tap hush the house. She stacked what she loved on the counter, her mother's tureen, the ceramic geese salt shakers Caleb had once insisted were majestic birds. She pictured Ray's hand on her wrist, the plate tilting away. No gifts, no food. The memory clicked into place like a match finding its strike strip. By midnight, she had made a list in 2 columns, keep and leave. It was less inventory than ritual. Under keep, the deed, the keys, the calm. Under leave, apologies that only covered yesterday and never the next hour. She slept lightly and woke before the sky. In the mirror, she practiced the sentence that had arrived intact and ready, a small polished stone in the mouth. We'll be updating our agreement. Not I'm sorry. Not I understand. An agreement. As if the whole thing had always been a contract because it had been, whether anyone said it aloud or not. Terms, expectations, payments handled in affection and assumed obligations. She would do what she had done at Harborfield Assurance, what she had done for 30 years whenever the world mistook her politeness for permission. She would put it in writing. At 8, she texted Caleb. Could you and Ray be home around 10? I have someone coming by to look at the guest room leak. Sure, he wrote. Everything okay? Better than okay, she replied, and surprised herself by meaning it. By 9:50, Lydia had set a fresh pot of coffee and opened every blind. Light laid clean stripes across the floors. The house looked like a brochure, the kind that says we are sane people who pay things on time. Paula Monroe arrived at 10 sharp in a navy coat and boots that could taste ice and choose not to slip. She held a clipboard and the sort of leather portfolio that made men in suits stop interrupting. She hugged Lydia, squeezed once, and went to work, measuring walls, peering at the attic hatch, photographing the furnace label. When Caleb and Ray walked in, Paula was finishing a photo of the living room mantel. Ray's gaze snagged on the portfolio, then the clipboard, then Paula's badge that read Monroe Property Services. She smiled her cranberry smile. Oh, are we selling? We're clarifying, Lydia said mildly. Paula, this is my son and his wife. Lovely to meet you, Paula said. Professional warmth switched to high. I'm here to complete a routine owner's assessment. We'll have updated figures, market rent and potential sale by later today. Ray's mouth opened, closed. Owner's assessment. Paula turned to Lydia. Shall we start with the primary bedroom? Lydia nodded and led the way, the steadiness back in her hands, brighter now like a new coin. As they crossed the hall, she heard Caleb ask Ray in a hush that carried, Did you know? And Lydia felt the house tilt, just slightly, toward true. The plate, the smile, the match, none of it mattered now. The contract would. The light would. The fact of the deed in a plain manila folder would. On the nightstand in the primary bedroom, Lydia laid out the folder like a place setting. Maple Haven LLC. The deed. The tax receipts. The auto-pay confirmations. The small dull magic of adulthood, assembled incontrovertible. Let's begin, she said, and even Ray's pretty cruelty had nothing to grip. Paula's pen ticked softly as she paced the room, measuring tape snapping back to her palm like a disciplined ribbon. Lydia stood by the window, the manila folder open on the dresser. Caleb lingered in the doorway. Ray hovered half a step behind him, the scarf a bright bandage across her throat. Market rent, Paula said, glancing from notes to Lydia. For this zip, this footage, this condition lands between $3,250 and $3,600. I'll recommend $34. Ray made a small, incredulous sound. Dollars? Monthly, Paula said, pleasantly. Less if the owners accept pets with a deposit. More if the piano stays. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. Mom, we've been paying 18. You've been paying when you remembered, Lydia replied, not unkindly, with utilities folded in. It was a family rate because we were acting like a family. I think it's time we put our arrangement into writing. Ray's smile tried to climb back onto her face and slid off. Writing implies a landlord. You're not our landlord. She gestured at the room as if it contained the right word. You're his mother. I am, Lydia said. And I'm also the owner, through Maple Haven LLC. We let those lines blur. That was on me. We're drawing them again. Caleb looked at the folder. He'd known the house was secure, had nodded when Lydia once mentioned a company. He had never asked for details. Now the details stared back like a clean ledger. Is this because of last night? He asked softly. It's because of last night, Lydia said, and the night before that, and the month before that, and the year when thank you became we assumed. I enabled it because it felt like love. It isn't. This, her fingers tapped the folder, is love that knows its limits. Paula cleared her throat with diplomatic timing. 2 options, she said briskly. 1. You sign a market rate lease for 12 months, utilities in your own names by the end of next week. 2. We terminate the informal arrangement and I list the property. If you choose option 2, Maple Haven will buy out any documented improvements you personally funded, paint, hardware, that fence section at fair value. Ray blinked. You'd evict us. You'd move, Lydia corrected, on a timeline that respects everyone's dignity. 30 days, 60 if needed. But I won't be insulted in my own home and pay for the privilege. Caleb swallowed. We'll need to talk. Of course, Lydia said. Over dinner would be nice. Without jokes. Paula snapped a photo of the closet and packed away her tape. I'll email the draft lease by 5, she said. Lydia, I'll swing by later for signatures on the management agreement. They walked Paula to the door. Ray managed a brittle thanks. The moment the door closed, she turned. You can't just spring this on us. We have plans. A budget. You built a budget on a gift you decided was a right, Lydia said. It isn't. And it's not sudden. It's simply spoken aloud. Ray's voice sharpened. Caleb, say something. He stared at the floorboards he'd learned to walk on. She's right, he said, surprising them both. I should have seen it. I let it be easy. Ray recoiled as if at a bad smell. Unbelievable. Ray, Lydia said gently, you're welcome to stay for coffee. I have work, Ray said, and left the way she had arrived, like the door owed her space. In the quiet that followed, Lydia brewed 2 mugs and handed one to her son. He wrapped both hands around it, as if it were winter and he was a small boy again. I'm not angry at you, Lydia said. I'm correcting course. He nodded, shame and relief fencing inside him. I never meant. I know, she said. Meaning well is how people ruin each other. At noon, Lydia's phone buzzed with an unknown number. Ms. Hart? Wendy from Hartford Assurance Corporate HR. I wanted to follow up about your separation package. Lydia's chest tightened. Yes. We noticed irregularities, Wendy said, her tone practiced sunshine. We'd love to discuss a potential transition into a senior claims role. Salary adjustment, back pay consideration. Could you come in tomorrow? Lydia held the phone a fraction farther from her ear, as if distance could help her think. Yes, I can. Wonderful. You'll receive a calendar invite from a Ms. Crawford as well. She's coordinating. After they hung up, Lydia stared at the call log. The number looked legitimate. The words felt too smooth. She texted Paula, do you know anyone in corporate investigations at Hartford? And within minutes had a reply. Detective friend. Off-duty consult. Want her to ring you? Yes, Lydia typed, then laughed at herself. When you've spent a decade in insurance, you learn that the strangest part of disaster is how closely it resembles a Tuesday. Detective Mia Morrison called an hour later. Her voice was low, careful. Paula says you got an HR call. Before you show up anywhere, forward me the email when it lands. The email landed. Lydia forwarded. Morrison called back almost immediately. Header's clean. Domain is off by 1 letter. It's a spoof. If they get you in a room, they'll ask for documents under the pretext of rehiring, bank info, deed copies, maybe identity verification. Lydia's skin chilled. To file things in my name, she said. Liens, loans, or to challenge your capacity, Morrison said. We've seen a cluster of cases where someone manufactures a guardianship emergency to force a sale. Do you know anyone who'd benefit from destabilizing you right now? Lydia thought of Ray's smile like a blade. She thought of the way the door had sounded closing. Yes, she said, and maybe someone I've never met. Good, Morrison said. Not the yes, your clarity. Papers rustled on her end. Don't respond. I'll open a case. Meanwhile, lock your credit and move any accounts tied to the property into a different bank. Use the LLC. Keep your originals off-site. When they hung up, Lydia sat very still, feeling both foolish and grateful. The house hummed around her, fridge, vents, the old bones of timber doing their quiet work. She got her coat and walked to the small bank 3 blocks over. It smelled like pens and carpet cleaner. She had the Maple Haven folder under her arm and a new steadiness in her step. By 5, Paula's email arrived with the lease draft and 2 attachments: owner management agreement and market valuation summary. Numbers as clean as winter light. Lydia printed 3 sets and placed them on the table next to plates and the rosemary Lydia had saved from last night's roast, because some rituals could remain even if their meanings changed. Caleb came in at 6 alone. She went to her sister's, he said. She'll be back later. Then you and I will begin, Lydia said. They sat. They read. He asked questions, the practical kind she had hoped he would one day learn to ask. When he signed, he did it with the untheatrical care of someone choosing to be an adult. Ray returned at 8 with the scent of cold air and indignation. She half sat, half bristled. This is punitive. This is a line, Lydia said. You can step over it into clarity, or you can step away. Ray looked at Caleb, saw that he had already crossed, and something fragile in her face flickered. Resentment, fear, a childhood scarcity that had learned the wrong lessons. She signed, the pen a tiny sword. Keys, Lydia said, palm out. They stared at her, startled. You'll keep your set, Lydia added, gentler now. And you'll return the emergency copy you made for the dog walker and never told me. We start again clean. We all do. Caleb stood, went to the junk drawer and brought back 2 key rings, their daily set and the secret one with the neon tag. He set the latter in her hand. It was warm from his pocket, from his habit of carrying what wasn't his and assuming it wouldn't be noticed. Numbers, Lydia said next, sliding over a sheet with utility company logos. Call tomorrow. Transfer by Friday. If you need help, ask. Asking isn't failure, it's the opposite. Ray folded her arms. And lines, she said, acidic. Lydia smiled, real and small. We just drew them. Outside, the street lamp clicked on, painting a gold ladder across the snow. Inside, paper rustled, pens scratched, and for the first time in a long while, Lydia felt the house square itself under her feet, as if the frame had been waiting, patient and sure, for the owner to speak aloud what the beams already knew. The morning arrived with the kind of clean winter light that makes even lies look honest. Lydia brewed coffee, set out 3 bowls for oatmeal out of habit, then put 2 back. Habits, she decided, would get the same audit as everything else. By 9, Caleb had called the utility companies, his voice steady, his pen producing grown-up check marks next to the water, gas, electric. Ray hovered in the hall, scrolling, sighing. When the electric rep asked for an email, Caleb gave his, not Ray's. That, more than the signatures, felt like the hinge creaking toward a new door. At 10, Paula texted. Morrison looped me in. Quick drop by. Lydia replied. Doors open. Detective Mia Morrison appeared without drama, a charcoal coat, a neat bun, calm eyes. She did what good investigators do. Looked longer than was comfortable and asked fewer questions than curiosity would demand. Unplug your printer on nights and weekends, she said after 5 minutes, pointing to the wireless unit under the desk. These models broadcast their own little beacon. I've seen bad actors piggyback the network through them. Ray laughed from the doorway. Bad actors? This isn't a spy movie. Morrison turned to her with polite gravity. Most spy movies are about money and entitlement, which makes them domestic. Ray retreated a step, as if the detective had moved closer without moving at all. Morrison set a small pouch on the table. Signal detector. Run it along outlets, smoke detectors, vents. If it chirps, don't touch the device, call me. She took out a folder and slid a printed email across. Your spoof. They registered the domain 15 days ago out of a mailbox store in Quincy. We're tracking ATM pulls tied to other victims, always women with property in small LLCs. How many? Lydia asked. Enough that I stopped saying trend and started saying pattern. Morrison's mouth thinned. Your LLC structure was solid. It made you a hard target. The aim was to soften you first, family pressure, employment anxiety, and then hit with paperwork while you were wobbly. It almost worked, Lydia said. A small anger warmed her like tea. It worked on some. Morrison nodded. We'll try to make sure it works on fewer. In the meantime, lockboxes for your originals. She paused. And cameras at your eaves. Visible ones. Predators prefer shadows. I'll have Paula arrange it, Lydia said. Ray, unable to bear being scenery, re-entered the frame. Are you accusing us of something? No, Morrison said. I'm reminding all three of you the house is worth what strangers will do to get it. When you feel tempted to treat Lydia like an obstacle, remember there are people outside who are thrilled when you do. Ray's face organized itself into something like shame, and then abandoned the project. I have a call, she said, and fled. When she was gone, Morrison looked at Caleb. Make friends with boredom, she advised. Pay on time. Leave a paper trail. Boring paper keeps people safe. After she left, the house felt like it had been given a tetanus shot. Brief sting, long protection. At noon, Lydia went to the bank with a canvas tote and her quiet resolve. In the safe deposit room, the clerk slid a box across green felt. Lydia placed inside the original deed, life insurance letters from years ago, the LLC binder, and the letter Richard had written her the winter Caleb was born. The one that began, we can afford the crib without asking my mother. She kept that one out, after all, and slipped it into her coat. On her way back, a man in a neon vest stood near the corner pole, clipboard in hand. Cable audit, he announced as she approached. We're verifying serials for the neighborhood. Show me your work order, Lydia said. He blinked, surprised. Lady, I'm freezing. I'm freezing and I still own things, she said pleasantly. Work order. He produced a laminated badge from his pocket with a logo that looked like a logo drawn from memory. She smiled. I'll call the company to confirm. You're welcome to wait. When she took out her phone, he lost his enthusiasm for customer service and drifted down the block. Boring paper, she murmured, pleased with herself. The lease came back countersigned from Paula by 3. There were also 2 polite invoices and an owner's statement that itemized the year like beads, taxes, insurance, the plumber who'd resized the trap under the upstairs sink, the roof patch after last storm season. Lydia stared at the roofline cost and felt not anger but relief. Bills are honesty written in numerals. Ray returned from calls at 4. She stood in the kitchen doorway with a softness Lydia believed only the first time. I was harsh, Ray said. We can reset. We already did, Lydia said. With ink. Ray stepped closer, hands folded like a student. I meant relationally. I grew up being told there's never enough. When I see granite countertops, my body thinks if I don't grab, I'll starve. It isn't about you. Or maybe it is, but I don't want it to be. Lydia considered. A truth can be both confession and tactic. The difference is what the speaker does after speaking. You have a key to a door, she said. Use it to come home on time. It's the only reset I believe in. Ray's eyes shone. Thank you. Then, could we keep the auto pay as is, just for this month? My card has points. No, Lydia said, kind but firm. Fresh numbers. Fresh lines. Ray nodded, a little too readily, and left her a perfume that hung in the hall like a promise people never planned to keep. That night, Lydia slept lightly, as if the house had put its weight on her shoulder and asked her to listen. At 2:30, a noise. Metal clicking against metal, a whisper scuff. She sat up. In the hall, the new camera Paula had installed at dusk offered a small red dot like a ruby in a ring. She patted barefoot and watched the live feed on her phone. A shadow at the side gate, another shape hunched near the basement bulkhead. A thin beam of light licked along the padlock. Lydia took a breath that felt like standing on ice and dialed Morrison. The detective answered on the second ring, voice already awake. "I see it," she said. Paula had looped the feed into the precinct's watch list. "Units 2 minutes out. Lights on inside. Don't engage." Lydia turned on the porch and stairwell and hallway lights, an old ship flaring all its lamps to tell the fog. Occupied. The figures froze, then dissolved into the night as if the dark had been invented for them personally. Within 3 minutes the street drank blue. Officers moved like careful chess pieces, sweeping yard angles and fence lines. Morrison appeared, hair now looser, eyes the same. She crouched by the bulkhead. "Scrape marks. They came prepared to cut. They left because you signaled you were not asleep and not alone." "Thank you," Lydia said, shaking only when Morrison looked away. Morrison stood. "You're going to want to feel unsafe," she said. "That's reasonable. Counter it with routines that make intruders bored. Motion lights, curtains at predictable hours, the appearance of company. Predators hate neighborhoods. Make your life look like one, even when it's just you." Behind them, Caleb hovered, face pale, phone in a fist. Ray, robe cinched too tight, stared with an expression Lydia didn't recognize until she named it. Fury at an interrupted plan, or at a world that refused to bend. "Could Ray's sister know your schedule?" Morrison asked mildly as they all drifted toward the warmth. "Probably," Ray answered for herself, too quickly. "We talk." Morrison nodded as if Ray had told her the weather. "Then don't," she said. "At least not for a while." When the patrol car idled away, the silence left behind had a new texture. Not emptiness, but a held breath. Caleb approached his mother in the hall. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything that isn't just tonight." "Apologies are for the past," Lydia said, echoing herself from the day before. "Show me the future at 8 a.m. when you're on hold with the gas company." He smiled despite it all. "I can do that." Ray drifted toward the stairs. "I have to be up early," she said, already half absent. "We good." "We're lawful," Lydia said. "Good is for later." The next morning was the opposite of cinematic. There were no arrests on the lawn, no tearful speeches. There was Caleb at the table, coffee beside him, repeating account numbers to a utilities clerk who put him on hold and came back with apologies and a cheerful script. There was Ray not volunteering her card, just for this month. There was Lydia driving to a small office park to meet a real HR manager who greeted her by the right name and slid across a legitimate offer, a return with back pay, a role that required the stubbornness she had been punished for last year. "We need someone who knows where the paper cuts happen," the manager said. "You seem like a person who bleeds once and takes notes." Lydia laughed, surprised by the sound and by the way the room seemed to come into focus around it. "I am," she said. "I do." On her way home, past the bakery with the good citrus tarts, her phone buzzed. A text from Paula, 2 more spoof attempts in the area. "Your camera footage helped them ID a plate. Morrison says thank you." Under it, a second message from Caleb, gas switched. "Electric set for Friday. Internet transferring Monday. We're boring." Lydia typed back, "Boring is beautiful." When she turned onto Maple Drive, the house looked exactly as it had yesterday and nothing like it had ever looked before. Not bigger, not smaller, just honest. A house that had doors and locks and lights, but also boundaries written on paper and in the mouths of the people who lived there. She parked, sat for a moment, and read Richard's old letter again. "We can afford the crib without asking my mother." She smiled at the irony and the grace of time, folded the letter along its usual seam, and slipped it into the glove box like a little insurance policy against forgetting what she had learned. Love gives. Dignity invoices, and the only walls worth keeping are the ones you build in daylight with witnesses, signatures, and a very good pen. The week after the shocking confrontation felt strangely quiet in Margaret's house. The silence, however, wasn't peace. It was tension waiting to explode. David had been distant, leaving early for work and returning late. Rachel, on the other hand, tried to carry herself with dignity, though her eyes revealed a nervousness she could not hide. Margaret, seated in her living room with her ledger and old leather notebook, finally began piecing together the puzzle that had been haunting her for months. Bills that didn't add up, mortgage statements showing balances she hadn't touched, and then the mysterious phone calls that claimed she had outstanding insurance settlements. She called Detective Morrison again. "It's worse than I thought," she admitted, sliding a stack of copied papers across the table in his office. The detective scanned them carefully. "You were targeted," he said. "This wasn't random. They picked you because you're both vulnerable and wealthy enough to make it worth their effort." Margaret felt the sting of those words. Vulnerable. She remembered Rachel's smug remark at the Christmas dinner, "No gifts, no food." She had let her daughter-in-law treat her like dead weight, while others had been circling her like vultures. That night, Rachel tried to soften the edges of their relationship. She knocked gently on Margaret's door. "Can we talk?" she asked. Margaret allowed her in. Rachel's tone was quieter than usual, almost apologetic. I know I've been harsh, but I didn't realize how much you were doing for us. The house, the expenses, everything." "Harsh," Margaret repeated. "Rachel, you humiliated me in front of my family. You stripped the dignity from someone who gave you a roof over your head. That's not just harsh, that's cruelty." Rachel's face reddened. I thought you were hiding money, that you let us struggle while you sat comfortably. And who put that idea in your head?" Margaret leaned forward. Rachel hesitated, then whispered, "Linda Parker." The name made Margaret's blood run cold. Linda was Rachel's former supervisor at the insurance company, the one who had fired her under suspicious circumstances. Now it all connected. The strange calls, the fraudulent documents, the way Rachel always seemed convinced Margaret owed her something. "She told me," Rachel continued, "that you kept everything under your name to control us, that you could cut us off at any time. She said she'd help us fight for what was rightfully ours." Margaret sat back, stunned. It was exactly the manipulation Detective Morrison had warned her about. Linda had played both sides, feeding Rachel resentment and planting the idea that Margaret was the enemy. The next day, Margaret met with Morrison again. He confirmed their suspicions. "Linda Parker has been under investigation for property fraud. She works with her sister, a real estate broker. They've been targeting families where tension already exists, pushing relatives against each other until someone signs away assets." Margaret felt both vindicated and heartbroken. Her family had been turned into pawns in someone else's scheme. When she returned home, David was waiting for her in the kitchen. He looked tired, older than his years. "Mom, Rachel told me everything. About Linda. About the lies." Margaret studied his face, searching for sincerity. "And you believe her now?" David nodded slowly. "I want to. But I also need you to understand, Rachel thought she was protecting us. She was wrong. But she thought she was doing it for our family." Margaret exhaled, the weight pressing on her chest. "Family doesn't destroy one another to survive, David. That's not protection. That's betrayal." For the first time, David had no defense. His silence was louder than any words. That night, Margaret made a choice. She would no longer wait for her son or daughter-in-law to respect her. She would reclaim her own power, not through anger, but through action. She went to her desk, pulled out her pen, and began drafting new rental agreements. Market rate, fair terms, and this time, every clause protected her interests. If they wanted to stay, they would pay, not just in money, but in respect. As she wrote, she remembered something her late husband used to tell her. When people show you who they are, don't wait for them to change. Decide how you will live with it or without it. Margaret realized the truth was out, but the price of that truth would be steep. For Rachel, for David, and perhaps even for herself. By sunrise, the maple leaves outside had gone the color of rust, and Margaret decided she was finished letting other people name her life. She set the kitchen timer for 15 minutes, the length of one strong cup of coffee, and laid everything she had on the table. The bogus notice from Hartford Insurance, the unsigned lease addendum Rachel tried to slide in during the summer, the plumber's bill for a leak that never existed, photocopies of every check she'd written to keep the lights on. When the timer rang, she took a breath and called Detective Morrison. "Ready to stop being a mark?" he asked. I'm ready to stop being quiet, Margaret said. By noon, Morrison arrived with a compact tech, Ramirez, who carried a black case like a violinist on his way to war. They walked the perimeter, then inside, methodical, polite. Margaret watched from the threshold of the living room as Ramirez unscrewed the HVAC return grate with gloved hands. He tilted the grate. A pinhead lens winked back. That's one, he said softly. They found two more. One set in the crown molding of the dining room, trained on the head of the table, and another inside the nursery smoke detector Rachel had insisted on replacing for safety. The tech took photographs, then sealed each device in evidence bags and labeled them with a number Margaret forced herself to memorize. 41 to 1, 41 to 2, 41 to 3. Facts, not feelings. How long, she asked. Judging by the dust patterns and battery wear, months, Ramirez said. You were scripted. Morrison nodded. This is consistent with the Parker sisters. Linda at the insurance firm to harvest data. Maria at the brokerage to frame urgency. They seed stress, then swoop in with a solution. The cameras give them leverage, private fights to weaponize, tears to misinterpret, a meal to call neglect. Margaret's fingers shook, not from fear but from containment. She thought of Christmas dinner, of Rachel's hand snatching away the plate. Somewhere on a hard drive, that moment had been filed under asset. When David came by after work, his tie askew, he saw the evidence bags and stopped pretending. Mom, I didn't know about cameras. His voice cracked on the last word. I swear. I believe you, she said, and watched relief sweep through him like weather. Believing you isn't the same as trusting you to protect me. That has to be earned. I want to earn it. Then sit, she said, pointing to the table. We're going to practice what it looks like. She slid the new lease across to him, the one that put rent at market rate, defined boundaries, barred entry without notice, and included a clause about third-party harassment. David read slowly, a flush creeping up his neck. It's fair, he said at last. It's more than fair. Good, Margaret said, because fair isn't a favor. Rachel arrived 20 minutes later, mascara precise, jaw defensive. She looked at the evidence bags, then at Morrison, then at Margaret as if deciding where to aim. Is this necessary? She asked. What's necessary is that my house stop being a stage, Margaret said. Rachel's eyes flickered. I didn't put cameras in your vents. No, Morrison said evenly. But you repeated lines someone wrote for you about incompetence, isolation, protecting the children, until they sounded like facts. For a beat, Rachel looked flayed. Linda told me she said elder abuse claims move fast, and if the property was at risk, we should get ahead of it. She said she'd seen it before. She saw a spreadsheet, Margaret said. My age, the equity, my son's salary, our Christmas photos. She saw leverage. Rachel's shoulders sagged. I've been so scared of scarcity for so long, I didn't notice who was handing me the fear. Then notice it now, Margaret said, not unkindly, and decide who you are without it. Morrison's phone buzzed. He stepped into the hall, listened, returned. We've got movement on Linda. She booked a room downtown under an alias she's used before. We think Maria's with her. Miss Sullivan, I need a favor. Margaret raised an eyebrow. I've given enough favors for a lifetime. This one's for you, he said. We want her to walk into a conversation she thinks she controls. The plan was simple and mean in a way Margaret found medicinal. She would call Linda from the kitchen landline. Ramirez would route the call through a recorder and tell her, in a voice bone dry with civility, that she was considering options and concerned about legal exposure. She would mention the new lease, the market rate rent, and a rumor, planted by Morrison, that the family was fracturing under pressure. The bait wasn't the money, it was the control. She prides herself on solving messes she designs, Morrison said. She can't resist cleaning up. They rehearsed the script twice. On the third try, Margaret stopped reading and spoke like herself. Linda, she said when the line connected, letting the name land like a door left ajar. It's Margaret Sullivan. I wanted to thank you for checking in on us. You always seemed so concerned about our stability. A pause. Then that smooth, lacquered voice Margaret had only heard through Rachel. Margaret, of course, families can be complicated. They can, Margaret agreed. Which is why I'd appreciate a professional opinion on two matters: a contested lease and a potential protective filing. Someone suggested moving title temporarily to avoid predatory claims. I'm sure you've seen it. Another pause, longer, calculation rustling like silk. Why don't we meet? Linda purred. I could bring a colleague to answer questions. How generous, Margaret said, and gave the cafe Morrison had chosen, polite as a blade. They took the corner table by the window, Margaret in her navy coat, hair pinned up with the pearl comb she'd worn at 22. She had once thought pearls were fragile. She knew better now. Morrison and Ramirez sat 2 booths away, reading newspapers like props. Outside, the sky had the color of pewter. Linda arrived 10 minutes late with a woman whose smile didn't touch her eyes. Perfume first, then apologies. Traffic, she said. You know how it is. Of course, Margaret said. Let's talk safety. Mine. Linda laughed lightly. Margaret, truly. There's no reason to be dramatic. Ramirez's signal, a small scratch of his newspaper, said the mics were clean. Margaret folded her hands. 3 cameras, she said evenly. 1 in the nursery, 1 near the dining room, 1 in the vent. Installed while I was buying groceries and trusting my family to be a family. Linda's mouth didn't move, but her eyes narrowed half a degree. Cameras? That's troubling. Indeed, Margaret said, as is the non-existent case manager at Hartford who called me from a throwaway phone, and the forged addendum slid across my table. Tell me, Linda, how many houses have you harvested this year? Silence bloomed, hot and stunned. The colleague, Maria, shifted in her seat, fingers trembling just enough. Linda recovered. I'm not sure what you think you know. I know what I can prove, Margaret said, and laid out the copies. The spoof number record, the procurement logs from a tiny online shop that shipped 3 identical pinhole cameras to a P.O. box linked to a brokerage account in Maria's maiden name. The napkin-thin smile finally tore. You're bluffing, Linda said, but her voice was a step back from itself. Morrison stood, badge bright as a sunrise, and the cafe tilted into a different room. She isn't, he said. Linda Parker, Maria Parker, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, elder exploitation, unlawful surveillance, and tampering with property records. For a second, everything slowed. The espresso machine hissed, a spoon chimed against porcelain, someone laughed at something that would never be funny again. Then chairs scraped, bracelets clicked, rights were read. Maria wept, ugly, human. Linda stared at Margaret with a look that said some women cannot stand that other women learn to bite. You don't even like them, Linda said as the cuffs closed, a last splintered jab. Your son, his wife. You were going to raise their rent. I did, Margaret said, because love without boundaries is just hunger with a halo. Outside, the pewter sky split and a slice of winter light slid down the street. Morrison gave a small, quiet nod. You did well. I did necessary, Margaret said, and discovered there was a flavor beyond relief, something more akin to alignment. That night, the house felt new. Not because anything had changed in its bones, but because Margaret had reclaimed the grammar. She cooked black bean chili and left the kitchen door open. David came by with a bag of dinner rolls and a bottle of seltzer, unsure at first, then steadier. Rachel followed, hair unarmored, eyes red-rimmed but clear. I called the therapist our insurance covers, Rachel said. I booked 6 sessions. For me. She swallowed. If you'll let us stay, we'll pay the new rent. We'll earn the rest. Margaret ladled chili into bowls and thought about the ways people say sorry without using the word. You'll sign the lease tomorrow, she said. You'll also bring me a list of your automatic transfers. No more secrecy. And Sundays are mine. Dinner at 5. Phones off. Rachel nodded, relief and accountability braided tight. David exhaled like he'd been underwater for months. They ate at the dining table where a camera had watched them learn each other's fault lines. Tonight, the room observed something else. The slow, stubborn art of repair. After the dishes, Margaret stood alone by the window, watching the maple leaves lift and settle. The house hummed its familiar hum. The refrigerator, the faraway traffic, the clock that had belonged to her mother. She thought of all the times she'd swallowed her questions until they calcified into silence. She wouldn't do that again. Her phone buzzed. A message from Morrison. Search warrants executed. Additional devices recovered from the Parkers' office. Expect a call from the U.S. Attorney. You made this possible. Margaret typed back, I made this personal. That's different. Then she set the phone face down, turned off the kitchen light, and let the darkness belong to the rooms without fear in it. Upstairs, in the small bedroom she'd chosen for herself when she first gave the master suite to the kids, Margaret opened the window an inch and breathed in the cold. She thought of pearls. Their making is irritation transformed into something luminous. Perhaps dignity was like that too, layer by layer, around the grit of what you refused to accept. Tomorrow would be leases and bank transfers and calls with prosecutors. Tomorrow would be the price of choosing yourself. Tonight, Margaret lay back, pulled the quilt to her chin, and listened to the house practice a new language, hers.